Hey film fans, welcome to Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter. In this video, I want to do something a little bit different than I've done before, and that is to consider the depictions on screen of two living people in recent screen texts, let's say. One is the depiction of Jon Peters in Paul Thomas Anderson's mostly fictional Licorice Pizza. And the other is the depiction of Pamela Anderson in the recent Hulu/Disney Plus series, Pam and Tommy. Both Pamela Anderson and Jon Peters are still alive. They actually have an interesting sort of historical postscript to this that I'll talk about briefly. But they had very different reactions to and sort of positions on the depictions of them in these screen texts. Now, Pam and Tommy is a TV show. I don't talk too much about TV in the series, but the sort of decision-making behind this depiction of Anderson could be just as true in film. It's just a sort of contemporary, fascinating example of what filmmakers or TV showrunners can do right or can do wrong when they decide to depict the lives of living people. So join me in this episode of Movie Talk as I consider the ethics of depicting the lives of living people on screen. Hi film fans, just a quick reminder that I'm now on Patreon, where I'm adding lots of new content all the time. If you like what I've been doing here and you've been watching these vids for a while, why don't you head on over there and drop me a dime. Link in the description. Hey everybody, in case you don't know, Pam and Tommy is a Hulu series. It was on Disney Plus here because we don't have Hulu. That depicts the lives and marriage and early relationship of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee. Pamela Anderson was a pinup star and then a TV star on Baywatch, and it's easy to kind of mock Baywatch these days and sort of mock her stardom, but in 1996, when these events were starting to kick off, Baywatch was one of the most popular, it was the most popular show in the world at the time, but one of the most popular shows in history. In 1996, over 1 billion people would often tune in weekly to watch Baywatch. This show was a huge deal, and Pamela Anderson was a huge presence, a huge media presence. This is just as the internet's kicking off, as the show kind of details. So she's kind of a huge tabloid presence, and on shows like, you know, Entertainment Tonight and these kinds of Inside Edition and that sort of stuff. But a huge presence nevertheless. Tommy Lee, a huge personality, the drummer for Motley Crue. His band's popularity was waning at the time. He was still a huge multimillionaire. They were still very popular, but the rise of kind of grunge and alternative music in the 90s sort of put a damper on the fever for 80s LA Sunset Strip glam metal, which Motley Crue had been the kind of, I don't know, the progenitors of, but at least at the forefront of. So Tommy Lee, 1996-97, still very famous, very well known, coming out of a high-profile, problematic relationship with Heather Locklear, and gets together with Pamela Anderson, and they have this whirlwind romance, 4 days, and they get married. And then a disgruntled craftsman, in real life I think he was an electrician, in the show he's a carpenter, played by Seth Rogen, breaks into their home to steal some stuff, and unbeknownst to him, he ends up with a videotape, a very personal videotape, which includes a lot of non-sexual content, but that was not the big deal at the time. The big deal was it had a lot of depictions of Tommy and Pamela Anderson having sex, including during their honeymoon, and this tape was secretly and then not so secretly disseminated via the internet and other ways throughout the late 90s and became kind of the first big celebrity sex tape. It wasn't the first one, there had been others previously, but with the rise of the internet, the rise of 24-hour news and celebrity news culture, and a lot of other factors, the spread of the Pam and Tommy sex tape was massive and rapid, and it was hugely damaging to Pamela Anderson personally and to her career. And this is what the show wants to depict. How this action, not only of stealing this very personal item, but then disseminating it in the way that it was, caused real damage and one might say trauma to Pamela Anderson. Jon Peters, on the other hand, is an asshole. Unproblematically so, no, I mean, problematically so, but to him, and unreservedly so. I mean, that's kind of his reputation. And if you don't know who Jon Peters is, just quickly, he's a movie producer. He's a big movie producer. He has a famous story because he got started in the 60s as a hairdresser, and he worked his way up to becoming a hairdresser to the stars, fell in love with many stars, had relationships with many stars, including a marriage to Leslie Ann Warren in the late 60s and early 70s, and then he met and fell in love with Barbra Streisand. And in that relationship, which lasted about a decade, and Streisand was very much in love with him, Jon Peters transitioned from hairdresser to movie producer. And his first big production, I think his first production, was the 1976 version of A Star is Born with Barbra Streisand and Kris Kristofferson. Slight tangent, it applies to my work as a film scholar because Polly Platt was the production designer on that film, her second film with Streisand. And Peters' reputation was built on being a son of a bitch. He's mean, he's violent, he threatens people, he's been physically aggressive towards people, he's abused or accosted or assaulted people. He's not a nice person, at least in his public sort of forward-facing movie producer persona. And if you want to read a deep dive into Peters' rise in the 70s, this book is really fantastic. It's from the 90s, so it's a little bit out of date now. It's great storytelling. Hit and Run, how Jon Peters and Peter Gruber, his partner for a long time, took Sony for a ride in Hollywood, by Nancy Griffin and Kim Masters. Highly recommend this book. It's great inside baseball in Hollywood, and really, you know, when I say Jon Peters is an asshole and a son of a bitch, don't take my word for it. And his portrayal by Bradley Cooper in Licorice Pizza really doubles down on that. So he plays Jon Peters in Licorice Pizza as King Asshole. And so I think these two films, or this film and this TV show, came out around the same time, or they're being talked about around the same time because Licorice Pizza is part of the Oscar buzz. And so as I was watching the two, I was thinking about these depictions of these living people and what went into the decisions to depict them, what went into the process of getting permission to do so if it was required, and how that process or all those decisions might affect a viewer's response to it. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about in this video. The first thing to consider is that Pamela Anderson did not give her permission to depict her life in this way. Now, just to be clear, her permission was not necessary. There's kind of a gray area around this, and I don't want to go into all the legal details. Maybe a legal scholar, one of those YouTubers, could do that. But generally, when a person is a celebrity or otherwise famous, oftentimes their lives are considered to be in the public interest. And Pamela Anderson is famous, and the story around the sex tape, whether she likes it or not, is famous. So the filmmakers or the show makers were within their rights to make this show. Furthermore, the show's based on an article that ran in Rolling Stone, and the showrunners bought the rights to that article. So they had the rights to turn that article into a TV show. They have all of this stuff on their side. Does that mean they should do it? That's what we're going to get into. But first, Jon Peters was asked for permission and gave permission. And it's a very interesting situation, I think, because Jon Peters is, as I've said, a raging asshole son of a bitch. He's been accused of all kinds of abusive behavior, including assault, but also sexual abuse. Now, the interesting thing in his relation to this film is that he's played in the film by Bradley Cooper. It's a fantastic performance. It's one of the best parts of the movie. But he's played as Jon Peters. Now, it's a fictionalized version, but it's as Jon Peters. Now, this is one interesting thing because there are many other characters in the film who are fictionalized versions of real-life people, but their names are changed and their circumstances are completely changed. So, Sean Penn's Jack Holden is loosely based on the actor William Holden, but it's completely fictionalized, and so on. But here we have Jon Peters. He's Jon Peters, and he mentions Barbara. You know, he's married to, or at that point in a relationship with anyway, Barbara Streisand. So this is the real guy. Now, why is it interesting that Bradley Cooper plays him? Well, Bradley Cooper wrote, directed, and starred in the most recent version of A Star is Born. When he did that, Jon Peters had the rights to that film because he still owned the rights from the '76 version. So Bradley Cooper had to get Peters' permission to make that film. Peters made money off that film. Peters was, I believe, an executive producer. When the film was coming out, or soon after, allegations of Peters' sexual abuse started to come out. And this was like at the height of Me Too, and every male who lived through the '70s Hollywood, it seemed like, was having allegations of sexual abuse and sexual assault levied against them. And with somebody like Jon Peters, I don't know the guy, but the shoe seems to fit, let's say. I'm not declaring his guilt or innocence. I'm just saying, like, people, when that story came out, were like, yeah, that tracks. But the reason I bring it up is because Bradley Cooper, wanting to promote his film, distanced himself from Peters at that time and said, I had to have him on board. I wanted to tell this story. He had the rights, but he was very removed from the process. So whatever Jon Peters did in his past, whatever crimes he might have committed, and so on, have nothing to do with me and my movie. It was just a financial transaction. Fine, that kind of stuff happens. If you're going to work in Hollywood, you're probably going to cross paths with sons of bitches. It's the nature of that place. But when they made Licorice Pizza, they decided to go to Peters and ask for his permission. And I don't know all the details. I don't pretend to know all the details. But I find that fascinating because, first of all, they could just as easily have fictionalized him and called him Jimmy Peterson, just like they took Jack Holden. They could have just as easily turned Barbara into someone else, and they could have had the exact same thing. Everybody in the audience who knows would have been like, oh yeah, that's Jon Peters. And the same effect. But they decided, for whatever reason, we want it to be the real Jon Peters. Having it be the real Jon Peters in a work of fiction, in a work of art, they also could have done without his permission. Just like they could make the Pamela Anderson show without her permission. But whether it's Peters' level of power, Peters' continued sort of position of strength in the industry, or his fearsome reputation, I don't know. They decided, we need to go to Peters and ask him for permission. And he said, yeah, you can depict me in this way. Just make sure you use my favorite pickup line, and I won't spoil it, but they do. And that's it. So they got his blessing, and that depiction of that horrible guy in Licorice Pizza, Jon Peters okayed. The question of power here is a very interesting one. I'm not going to go into it, but just to lay a few things out. Jon Peters is a man. Pamela Anderson's a woman. On its surface, still in Hollywood today, 21st century, post-Me Too, post-feminist, whatever. We still live in a patriarchy, and men still have more power. Financially, he's worth a lot more. I think he's in the sort of $300 million range, where Pamela Anderson's in the $20 million range. This is all according to Google, which who knows how real that is. And $20 million is nothing to sneeze at, but those are two different worlds, right? Even Tommy Lee, who's the kind of financial wizard, of Motley Crue, and whose net worth, again, according to Google, is sort of in the $70 to $80 million range, which kind of dwarfs Pam, but is then again dwarfed by Jon Peters. Peters ran Columbia for Sony with Peter Gruber, and he had immense power. Peters was behind a ton of huge hits, including Tim Burton's Batman movies, the Superman Returns. He was still making money off Batman and Superman into the 21st century. I think Christopher Nolan had to sort of kick him off set eventually because his presence was disturbing, but he was still involved with this stuff. He's still making tons of money from his properties in the 70s through the late 90s and early 2000s. So this is a guy who's got, you know, his fingers or his tentacles all throughout Hollywood. He has a lot more power as an individual. So when you think about one of the ways things get done in Hollywood, it's that you don't piss people off. So that's an interesting guiding point. Like, why would it be okay to piss off Pam Anderson, but not Jon Peters? But whether we're pissing them off or not, or getting their permission or not, this leads me to what I really want to talk about, which is the kind of ethics behind this. And ethics in filmmaking is a unanswered and perhaps unanswerable question. The idea that filmmakers who are presenting an audience with some version of entertainment, even if it's based on historical fact or historical reality, that they owe that historical fact or present living entity some sort of fidelity is a fraught question. And it comes up over and over again. It came up a couple years ago, 3 or 4 now, with the film The Green Book, which was a Best Picture winner, and the depiction of Don Shirley, the jazz musician, and how he traveled around the South with his white driver, and how the film sort of made the white man, crafted the white man into this sort of paragon of a white man's ability to learn to be good, and turned it into his story. And the Shirley family distanced themselves from that. And a lot of film critics and scholars said, well, this is a feel-good film, and this is a great film about racial harmony. It's not true. And eliding over or eliding over the kind of more complicated and nuanced reality of that story is unethical, or at least, let's say, an ethical disservice to a more complex story. This comes up over and over again. I remember back in the 90s when The English Patient was making a huge splash. And Ray Fiennes' character Almashi in that film, the real Almashi, was Nazi affiliated, and there's nothing about that in the film, or I think, it's been a while since I read Ondaatje's novel, but I don't think in the novel either, maybe a little bit. And there were huge discussions back then in 96, 97, whenever that was, about the ethics of erasing his Nazi connections. Because now we're taking a person who was, in effect, had ties to the Nazi party and turning him into a romantic hero. Is that an ethical thing to do? These questions don't have answers because there's no governing body. Excuse me, there's no sort of director of ethics that says, no, you can't do that. Yes, do that. Do it this way. And that's good. I'm not arguing that there should be. This is always going to be something that filmmakers have to grapple with. Now, they've most grappled with it in documentary filmmaking, and the question of ethics in that realm is long-standing, and it goes back decades and decades. And you can go back and read conversations about Nanook of the North, and you can read conversations about the transitions to direct cinema and cinema verite in the late 50s and into the 60s, and the reintroduction of staged reenactments with something like The Thin Blue Line in the late 70s. And always when these kind of things happen, documentary filmmakers engage in this question of ethics. And the ethics comes down to oftentimes transparency, power dynamics and money. By transparency, in documentary filmmaking, just quickly, it's the idea that I'm making a film about you and I'm putting all my cards on the table so you as a subject know. Power dynamics are about, like, is the filmmaker in a position of power over the subject, or is the subject more powerful? That changes the ethical equation. If you're going into like an impoverished community to make a film about that impoverishment, that economic precarity, as a filmmaker, you have a duty not to engage in sort of poverty porn or whatever it might be called. Like to give the subjects of your film a participatory role in framing their own story. If you are making a documentary about Henry Kissinger, a person who has had the power for 50 years to frame his own story, including the way he brushes over some of the criminal foreign policy behavior he engaged in, the dynamic is different because you don't have power over Henry Kissinger, so your relationship with that character, that subject, is different because what you're trying to probe is his power, right? Whereas with the impoverished neighborhood, what you're trying to do is depict the levers of power, perhaps, that keep that neighborhood in that state. So there's two different connections here, and it's actually a spectrum. It's not just he's more powerful, they're less powerful. You know, there's a spectrum there. Pamela Anderson's a millionaire. She's a celebrity, she's a famous person. That puts her in a somewhat privileged position. But she's also a woman who has been a victim of, first, a burglary, second, the sharing of her private life, and decades of slut shaming. And her fear around this series was, first, that it was going to bring it all up again, but second, that it was going to remind people about the existence of the tape and drive people to watch it again, thereby, you know, introducing her most intimate moments to a whole new generation of viewers. So in that sense, this production has a very sort of questionable power dynamic with its subject. Gordon Quinn, the great documentary filmmaker and theorist, has some interesting things to say about this kind of power relationship and the role that ethics, or the role that power plays in determining the ethics of filmmaking. There are no set rules in documentary filmmaking, only decisions about where to draw the line. I think that's a very important thing to think about in relation to the subject of this video. The other thing he says that I think is very good is the documentary process relies upon a constant negotiation of power relationships among the story, the subject, and the viewer. This is also very important, I think, into what I want to say about the reception of these two pieces of screen art. So let's just think about these portrayals for a moment. If you haven't seen Licorice Pizza, it's kind of like 5 or 6 short movies strung together that depicts this relationship between this teenage boy and an older woman who he meets through school because she works for the company that's doing the school photographs, and she becomes kind of like a babysitter, mentor, business partner, love interest, maybe weirdly reciprocal love interest, not wanting to be, but being drawn in. And so there's other ethical questions this film raises besides these ones. One of the extended kind of vignettes is when the boy, he's kind of an entrepreneur, decides he's going to sell waterbeds. It's set in the early mid-70s, and waterbeds are all the rage, and he's going to sell waterbeds. And then they decide they can't just sell waterbeds, they have to install them. And they get called to Jon Peters' home up in the hills to install the waterbed. And it's very extended. I couldn't show you the whole bit, but this is part of the early interaction with Peters.
I wouldn't normally leave somebody in my house when I'm not there, but I have to because you guys are so motherfucking late.
I'm sorry, there was no gas.
Yeah, well, that's an excuse. I'm gonna shove your fucking penis hole, man. What's your name?
Gary?
Gary. How big's your penis hole?
It's regular sized.
How would you know? Imagine what that would feel like if I shoved that excuse up there. That would hurt a lot, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I'd like to do.
I'm sorry, I don't want to make you any more late than you already are. You can leave.
Look at you, you cocky motherfucker. I like it. We speak the same language, huh? We're both from the streets.
Yeah.
I didn't see it before. That's, wow. Oh, you get right in there and you do it. Wow, you have a little, you have a tincture in your left eye, and you're deficient in vitamin K. Like a fucking doctor. You need to take more vitamin D and cod liver oil. See that Daytona Ferrari?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mine. Gary, that's filled with gas. That's gonna get me to the movies on time. Because I'm not a shithead idiot fuck up. I'm Jon Peters. My only problem in life is that I love tail too much. I love it. I love it so much. I love it so much. Is that your sister?
No.
Is your girlfriend?
No.
I love it so much it's gonna kill me one day. You know how much tail I get?
No.
All of it. It's all mine. You like Barbra Streisand?
Yeah.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
Yeah.
I do too. Gets boring, but you know. Yeah. I'm gonna kill you and your family if you fuck up my house. Okay? You got a
Okay.
cat?
No.
You got a dog?
No.
You got your brothers and sisters?
Brother.
Yeah, your brother? I'm gonna fucking choke your brother out right in front of you. Okay, Steve's gonna look after you while I'm gone. It's a pleasure to meet you, Gary. I want you to be horrified.
Okay.
Your life's on the line. But you know from that, right? It's the way of the streets.
So you see, he's brutal, he's horrible, he's an asshole, he's threatening the lives of children. I mean, my God, he's not a nice guy. And this is gonna go on for quite a while because what happens is they get resentful of this treatment and they decide to flood his home. You know, not too many spoilers, but he's not as gone as they think he is. And it's one of my favorite parts of the film. And Cooper plays Peters with this incredible verve throughout the scene. So the character, as despicable as he is played as despicable in a kind of larger than life way. He's a villain in the piece, but he is a likable villain, in part because of how he's written, in part because of how he's played. So he's given this opportunity to be a warts and all type person, and I think that's very important. Also, there's a meta level to this, where if you know who Jon Peters is going into this film, you probably also know Peters' relationship to Cooper via A Star is Born, and there's a good chance you know that the filmmakers got Peters' permission. So while you're watching this bravura asshole performance, you are knowing that as despicable as he appears on camera, he appears that way with the real Jon Peters' permission. So Jon Peters is getting a laugh out of this. Jon Peters probably appreciates the fact that, once again, he is a media presence. You know, if you go online and look up Jon Peters Licorice Pizza, there's 1,000,001 articles about who's the real Jon Peters, what's Jon Peters about, and they talk about Barbra Streisand, and they talk about A Star is Born, and they talk about Batman, and they talk about Superman, and Christopher Nolan, and the last A Star is Born. So he's gotten this whole kind of 6 months of, I'm back in the news again, baby, and I don't care if they depict me as an asshole, because I am, screw you. This is good for him, right? And it's interesting that it's good for him even when they felt like they had to ask for his permission. So he saw the angle, which he's always been good at, that, yeah, depict me as an asshole, I don't care. It's a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I'm gonna be back in the news. And he is. The portrayal of Anderson in Pam and Tommy is a lot more difficult to pin down because it's a several-part series and her character changes over the course of it. You can basically divide it into before the tape's released and after the tape's released, although there's a slight middle ground there when the tape is coming out, but it seems like they're going to be able to stop it. But it's basically sort of BT and AT. And Lily James plays her really well. I think the cast is great in this. Sebastian Stan is fantastic as Tommy Lee, and I'll come back to that in a minute because it's important. And the filmmakers' intentions were to tell this as Pam's story. They wanted to, you know, give her some dignity. They wanted to show how horrible the situation was for her. They wanted to sort of cast a very judgmental light on late 90s slut shaming. They wanted to cast a very judgmental light on the way the internet has allowed us to depersonalize and objectify the lives of people, even famous people. And it does that. I mean, it's very clear in its intentions throughout. It does all of that stuff. But while you're watching it, one of the things you have in the back of your mind, the flip side of the Peters example, is that, yeah, but Pam didn't want this. So the question then becomes not so much, can they do this without her permission? Because yes, they can. No one's getting sued. The film's making, or the series is making money, or made all of its money, or whatever. It's out there. They can do this, and they did. But for me, the question becomes the integrity of their professed intentions. We want to honor Pam. Yeah, but she doesn't want you to. Yeah, but we want to, and we're going to do it right. Yeah, but she doesn't want you to. Yeah, but we know better. That can be the case sometimes. Sometimes an act like this can exonerate somebody who doesn't want to be back in the spotlight, can, give a two-dimensional subject more dimensionality, more facets to their personality, can create empathy with a person, in this case celebrity, for whom less empathy was available before. All of those kinds of things can happen. But for that to happen, the product, the series in this case, has to be good. And here, I think, for me, is where the difference between these two is most stark. It's not that Licorice Pizza is a Paul Thomas Anderson movie and it's artsy or anything like that, or even that it's a great film, because I think it's kind of a mediocre film with really good parts. It's not Paul Thomas Anderson's best, it's not the best of the year. It's an okay film with really good parts. But the Peters segment is fantastic because they went into that fully into what they were doing, and they allow the Peters character multi-dimensionality even as he's an asshole. So what you have is fun. What you have is the ability to empathize with this Peters character, even though he's a prick throughout the whole segment. There are moments, partly because Bradley Cooper's a very good actor, there are moments where you're like, oh yeah, he's a jerk, but it sucks to be him right now. You know, and those little windows of empathy are important. In Pam and Tommy, the series is invested in trying to create big moments of empathy, series-long moments of empathy, and it doubles and triples down on this. And that, for me, is where it actually fails because their execution doesn't match their intention, and I'm going to explain what I mean. Early in the series, Pam is depicted as this sort of vivacious, guarded, as she would be. She's coming out of a relationship as well. She's also, paparazzi fodder all the time. But she's vivacious, she's fun-loving, her career's on the rise, she's got big plans, she's about to make a movie, she wants to have more agency on Baywatch, all kinds of stuff's going on, and she's very multi-dimensional. And when she and Tommy meet, I think it's in the second episode, their relationship, as crazy as it is, and as sort of alcohol and drug fueled and sex fueled as it is, sort of young people just going for it, it's also depicted, I think it's some of the best parts of the series, as fun, sexy in a really nice way, as nice as it can be between people I don't know, celebrities, larger than life sexy celebrities that I don't know. And it's consenting, it's tender in spots, and the depiction of Tommy Lee is very important in this, and Sebastian Stan plays him really well. It's less kind of mimicky than Lily James's role as Pam Anderson, and so it breathes a little more, which I think is important. But he's depicted as somebody who's fun-loving and whose vibe is in line with Pam's vibe. So it makes sense, even as crazy as it is, it makes sense that they would mesh like this.
I fucking love you, Tommy Lee. Oh my god. I love this bit. It's a very ancient saying, true and honest thought, that if you become a teacher, by your pupils you'll be taught. As a teacher I've been learning, you'll forgive me if I boast. And I've now become an expert on the subject I like most. Getting to know you. Getting to know you. Getting to know all about you. Getting to like you.
And their sex life, early on, before the tape gets out, is depicted, it's really depicted in the first few episodes as something like fun. It's some of the most kind of fun, enjoyable, slightly kind of kinky, healthy on-screen sex that I've seen in a sort of screen medium for a long time. And Pam is a big part of that. She's into it and she wants to be in this kind of relationship where their physical attraction to each other is intimate and physical and healthy and exploratory. And that's all really good, I think. It's one of the sort of justifications for, showing sex on screen. And it's an important part of what the series is trying to say too, because as some people start to watch the tape, one of the things that's going to bother them is not so much the depiction of sex, but the depiction of intimacy and the stealing of the intimacy. Because as the show also makes clear, a lot of the tape is not sex. A lot of the tape is just them hanging out and flirting and having fun with each other and having private moments of intimacy before and leading up to sex or after sex, or even just like eating food together and things like this. And some of the people who have the most averse reactions in the series to seeing the tape are people who can't imagine their own intimate lives being depicted like that. And I think for that argument to land, we need to see this sort of healthy relationship in the early stages of Pam and Tommy getting together. That's what makes it work later on. However, it's after the tape comes out and as it starts to become an increasing media presence that I think the series falters, and all of these questions that I'm raising, probably very inarticulately because I'm still kind of thinking through this, but all these questions lead into, I think, the series downfall. And that's because it becomes a kind of opportunity for the series to go on a ostensibly feminist diatribe. And as the tape spreads, Pamela Anderson starts to realize the damage it might do to her reputation. And she's right. Tommy also, as depicted in the series, recognizes this, and he's not like, screw it, babe, everybody has sex. He's depicted as having genuine concern for Pam and for this invasion of his privacy. He doesn't seem to care that much that he's naked on screen. He's like proud of his, member, but that it was done without his permission, which is a valid reason to be angry. And he's supportive of Pam, although he doesn't always get the extent of her anger and of her fear about what's going to happen. And that's an important part of the tension between them. But Pam is increasingly depicted in the series as emotionally devastated by this and acutely aware as a woman what this means for her and how it's different for her than it is for Tommy. And some of this has to do with like the fact that his career's not in a, nosedive, but in a sort of slow decline, and hers is on the rise and things like that. A lot of it has to do with the fact that he's a man and she's a woman. And everything that Pam says is true, but she gets these speeches throughout, like...
Well, they have to say something. They can't say the actual reason.
Which is?
That I don't have any rights. Because I have spent my public life in a bathing suit. Because I had the nerve to pose for Playboy. They can't actually say that sluts, and that's what this ruling is saying I am, in case you're unclear. They can't actually say that sluts don't get to decide what happens to pictures of their body. That I don't get to decide what happens to my actual body, so they say something else instead.
Pam, I understand your position.
You will never understand my position. I should never have done this. I let you lead me exactly where I knew we'd wind up, which is a place you've never been before. But I have, many times.
She's right. And I don't have any problem at all with what she's saying. And I understand why the showrunners want to put that in there. Because they're saying, this is our thesis. The problem is, it's relentless. And from the moment Pam realizes what's going to happen to her, what is happening to her, all that joy from early in the series, all those sort of multi-dimensional character traits evaporate. And she becomes worried and sad and concerned and occasionally angry. But she's on this very narrow line of fear. Now, in terms of what may or may not really have happened to her in her life, that might be true to life. It certainly makes sense that someone in her position would feel that way. So some people watching this might go, of course she feels that way. Great. Cinematically, however, the effect of it is to reduce her to a stereotype. And it reduces her to something like the scorned woman or the wronged woman stereotype. And I think it actually makes her more difficult to empathize with. I agree with everything she says. I feel for her in those scenes when she's explaining how bad this is for her. I'm not sort of saying that she's wrong to feel that way. What I'm saying is the showrunners made a poor decision in depicting her that way. And it wouldn't have taken a lot to change that. And there's two scenes I want to show you briefly that are Tommy-centered and why they're important. The first comes when she's about to leave. She wants some space from Tommy. She sees that he's not taking this seriously, and he suggests, let's get away from it all. Let's, just me and you, we'll go where no one can find us. It'll be like when we first got together. And she's like, yeah, because she loves him, you know? She's frustrated with him because he's not getting it, but she loves him. She wants this to work. So she's like, yeah, let's do it. And so they get in the car and they drive, and for some reason, they decide to stop halfway to wherever they're going. In Vegas, right? Everyone recognizes them right away. Everyone's seen the tape or knows about the tape. So they rush right up to their room, and it creates this horrible tension. They have another fight, and then we get this scene.
There. Oh, I'm boiling.
8.5. Not that I measured.
Hey, if music doesn't work out, you could always be a porn star.
Oh, yeah, bro. Just fucking, Vivid Video presents Tommy Lee, Kickstart My Heart On.
Dr. Fucker.
Yeah, and he thought he pounded the skins on the drums, but then just fucking... That's fucking... What's up, babe? Come here. Pamela. Babe. Babe!
Now, there's no doubt in that scene that Tommy's being a bit of a prick, right? And it makes sense that she would flee from him. So in terms of who Tommy Lee is at that moment, he's a jerk. But in terms of Tommy Lee, the character as played by Sebastian Stan in that moment, he's exhibiting a moment of human response. He's exhibiting he's opening the valve to release some of the pressure. I'm not saying he does it in an appropriate way. I'm not going to judge the appropriateness of Tommy Lee's behavior in general. Well, with one caveat coming up. But as a character, it makes him seem real and makes him seem believable. So he actually retains his three-dimensionality, which the Pam character is losing throughout this. And that's what makes the next scene I want to show you really important in an unfortunate way, I think. I don't know. We'll see. Let me know in the comments. So I haven't talked about this character, Rand Godier. And Rand Godier, who's played by Seth Rogen, is the guy who stole the tape. He's the carpenter who wasn't paid by Tommy at the very beginning. And in an act of revenge, he breaks into their house, steals a safe, and inside the safe is the tape. And he imagines he's going to get revenge on Tommy for not paying him and recoup his losses by selling this tape on the internet, and it gets completely out of his hands and he never makes the money he thinks he's going to make. He's got mobsters after him. He's resorted to a life of violence. Everything is falling apart for him. And he has one last ditch effort where he's going to sort of convince Tommy that he can stop this somehow in exchange for the amount of money he needs to pay off the mobsters who are after him. And we get this scene.
That the $26,938?
27. I don't got time for your fucking weird-ass numbers.
That's the exact amount you owe me for my labor and for my tools.
So that's what this is about? All this for some lousy 27 grand?
With that, you will atone. I will be made whole once again.
I don't see that happening.
You don't see what happening?
You being made whole. I may not know much, but I do know one thing, and that is winners and losers, and you, son, are a loser. A bottom, a beta, a chump, a bitch. No 27 grand's ever gonna change that. That's just you, bro. For life.
Well, you're a bad person.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I am. But what about Pamela? What does she do to deserve what you've done to her? Do you have any idea what you put that warm, kind, sweet woman through? Is she a bad person?
It's good. Sebastian Stan's great there. Rand Godier, Seth Rogen, has his moment of clarity. He's going to get a little redemption story out of this. Yes, the scumbag who started all of this gets redemption. Tommy Lee's speech there, what about Pam? Maybe I'm an asshole, but what about Pam? This scene, I think unintentionally, is the heart of this show. And this is where the sort of intentions and the ethics of this all start to crumble, because I think Tommy Lee is the hero of this series. And I don't think that was their intention. But they spent so much time focusing on Pam and constructing this kind of feminist or sort of feminist adjacent victim that they don't allow her to breathe, so that once she's made her second or third speech about how horrible this is for her as a woman, you're kind of like, yeah, that's true. Yes, you're right. Also, we got it the last time. This isn't a problem with Pamela Anderson, and it's not really a problem with Lily James's performance. It's a problem with the script and with the showrunners. And so you get a scene like this where Tommy says, yeah, I am a bad person. Or maybe I'm a bad person. I like the maybe. But what about Pam? And in that moment, your empathy for Pam kind of re-blossoms. And that keys into why Tommy fell in love with her. That keys into the early episodes where they're happy and they're in love and they're zesty and they're full of life and they're having great sex and everything is super. It's Tommy Lee who's given that. And I think that the ethics here are interesting because without Pam's input, without somebody on Pam's side there saying like, let Pam breathe. Let's see her have some fun. Let's see her like exert her power in a cool way, in a fun way, in an interesting way. Not because it ever necessarily happened that way. The Tommy Lee and Rand Godier scene at the fence never happened. That's completely fictionalized for the series. Tommy gets that moment. Why not create a fictionalized moment, or a true one, where Pam like blows it off or has fun or tells someone to get screwed or something where she exhibits a kind of character dimensionality. Now, this is going to sound really weird, I think, but that like effort to make her seem like a victim, which she was, makes her character seem boring. And this is really important because what the series does in the end is make Tommy Lee fascinating. Sebastian Stan's great. He's written to be this fun-loving guy. What we never see until a title at the end is that Tommy Lee was a domestic abuser. He was accused of domestic abuse by Heather Locklear, and he was imprisoned for domestic abuse against Pamela Anderson. You wouldn't know that watching this until we get that title at the end. What you get instead is, hey, I'm Tommy Lee, this is fun, don't be such a dick to me and my wife, I'm gonna make you pay for that, but mostly I'm having fun. And it's a great performance to watch. And I think that's because they were so concerned with how they depicted Pam and so concerned with like proving to themselves the legitimacy of their endeavor by making her victimhood a reality that they forgot to make her personhood a reality. And that's where the series fails, I think. And that's where all of their intentions, all of their sort of declarations of allegiance to Pam fall apart because they blew it. Somehow I only found out when I was researching this that Pam Anderson and Jon Peters actually had a relationship a few years ago, which is shrouded in weird mystery as to whether they actually got married or not. They were certainly together for a little while. It's neither here nor there to this video, but I wanted to mention in case someone was going to throw it in the comments. Yeah, I know. But even if you go and read some of the depictions of that relationship and the way Jon Peters talks about his relationship with Pam, it's really icky. And his whole thing is, oh, she needed money and she needed me to pay off her debts, and once I paid off her debts, she blew me off. Take that story and compare its reception to what I've just been talking about, and it actually makes the whole thing like ickier for me. I'm not going to go into it, but I just wanted to say, yeah, I know they were together for a little while. Somehow I think I knew that a few years ago, and I was like, wait, what? And had forgotten it until I started to do a little research for this video. And I was like, oh my God. Oh yeah. Weird. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this video, if not convincing you of anything, at least gave you something to think about. If you'd like to see me do more videos like this, where I talk about sort of the cultural or philosophical or ethical context of a film, let me know in the comments. You know, usually I'm talking about kind of film style, film narrative, film form, and those sorts of things, which I will continue to do. But if you'd like to see an occasional video like this, yeah, just let me know. Also, if you've watched this far, please hit the like button. If you haven't thrown me a subscribe yet, I'd love if you would. And share this video with any friends who you think might enjoy it as well. This has been Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter. Keep watching movies.